Hello, welcome. Thank you for joining me today. I'm going to be reading through one of the magazines of the National Parks Conservation Association. So without further ado, let's get into it. This is the summer 2024 edition of the National Parks Conservation Association magazine. Our main article today is on weeding the Grand Canyon, which is not something that you might think needs to be done. It seems they are on the search for an invasive plant and ghosts of the past on a journey downriver. So our cover photo is of some people on a raft in the Colorado River going through the Grand Canyon, partaking on their search. Looks like our other featured articles are 4 Walks in Rocky Mountain, The Dogs of Cat Island, and a Radical Rescue Mission. Our first page, of course, opens up onto an ad for American Cruise Lines, exploring the lower Mississippi River with the leader in U.S. cruising. Looks like a 9-day, 8-night exploration from New Orleans to Memphis, stopping at all these points along the way. Seems like a nice way to get a overarching excursion of the Mississippi. Over here is our contents with page numbers for our main articles and a view looking up through the trees to the sky, almost like you're laying on your back in a meadow. Looks like this summer 2024 edition is volume 98, number 3. Not sure if you can see that. This magazine must have been around for longer than I thought it has. This is some more contents with some other main articles. Looks like we've got a photo of a film crew on the rim of the Grand Canyon for the independent movie Hard Miles, which was released in April of this year. Here we've got an underwater scene, some reeds with the light trickling in through the water. On this page we've got the President's Outlook. This must be the President of the National Parks Conservation Association, writing about the great outdoors. It says, with its long days and warm evenings, June has always felt to me like an invitation to get outside, making it the perfect time to celebrate the Great Outdoors Month. Initially founded as Great Outdoors Week in 1998, the event became a month-long observance a year later, following the passage of a Senate resolution. Every presidential administration since then has continued the tradition through proclamations celebrating the month, as well as the parks and national treasures that enrich us as a nation and as individuals. A growing body of research confirms what I've suspected since I was a child who spent long hours playing in the woods, waters, and fields of New Jersey. Time spent in the great outdoors is good for us in so many ways. It improves our mood and reduces our stress levels. It increases our attention and gives our brains a boost. It helps us to stay fitter and healthier and sharpens our sense of wonder. Moreover, it's vital to our healthy development as children and can help us stay young, or at least young at heart, as we grow older. At NPCA, we have been working for more than a century to bring together parks and people including those with limited access to public lands. In recent years, we've partnered with the city of Homestead, Florida to establish free shuttles to Everglades and Biscayne. We've brought youth from Salt Lake City and Los Angeles, some of whom had never been to national parks, to places such as Arches and Canyonlands and Mojave National Preserve to have transformative experiences with the natural world. And we've established ongoing volunteer opportunities, such as our longleaf pine restoration project in Big Thicket National Preserve, to help others experience the satisfaction that comes from being in and giving back to a wild and beautiful place. But the truth is, every one of us can help make such connections by committing to taking the people in our lives, friends, family, neighbors, co-workers, to national parks. It's a rare win-win-win, a simple but meaningful thing we can do for ourselves, for each other, and for the places that inspire us. With gratitude, Teresa Pinero. This page is a note from the editor. It says, "Finding the Song." The benefits of closely observing nature come up multiple times in this issue. In A Badge of Wonder, Joe Mullick reflects on the universality of junior ranger exercises that call on kids to sit still and record what they hear, feel, and think. Melissa writes about scouring the banks of the Colorado for a hard-to-identify invasive plant in Weeding the Grand Canyon on page 42. And in his travel story, Nicholas Brouillard escapes to the Rocky Mountain 4 times over the course of a year to note the passage of seasons in an intentional way. Nicholas's experiment was inspired by a book, and I, in turn, was inspired by Nicholas to spend some time alone in Rock Creek Park, the national park site in Washington, D.C. that runs by my neighborhood. The park is a gem and a savior. This is where I run, hike, and bike, where I meet friends and go to picnics. But how often do I just sit on the water's edge and contemplate? Honestly, never. On a warm Sunday in late April, I strolled down to the park and headed into the woods. The eponymous creek was genuinely babbling, and I watched a party of ducks swoop onto the water with a splash, then rush away again. I saw wispy dandelions and found tiny yellow and purple wildflowers hiding among the messy vegetation on the forest floor. I listened to the squeaks and calls of birds and the rustling sound of chipmunks and squirrels. As I watched, the sinking sun lit up the backs of leaves and cast long shadows. I took a photo, the one above, of an iridescent green leaf that was practically glowing. Eventually, I ended up on a hillside where the neighborhood kids go to sleep in the winter, go to sled in the winter. It'd be odd if they slept outside. I lay down for a moment in the grass, breathed deeply, and stared at the sky. The leaf has a song on it, wrote the late poet Mary Oliver, who knew a thing or two about small wonders and how the natural world can open and calm you. I was reminded by my mini expedition how little effort it can take to slow down and listen for that music. It's always so worth it, isn't it? That's from Rona Maresh, the National Parks editor. So I guess if there's one thing to take from this edition, it's to try and get outside and slow down this summer. You take in the nature around you, find gratitude and oneness with it. I think that's something we could all work on in the hustle and bustle of today's society. I know that I could. Over here, we've got some people out doing that, camping. An ad for Progressive RV insurance to make sure that the only thing you need to worry about when you're outdoors is just being. was a little bit less blurry for you guys. I'll have to work on that for the next one. This page is called Letters. This one from Carol Kicker, saying that Catherine de Graaf's article about her visit to Chiricahua National Monument reminded me of my husband and my marvelous visit there 3 decades ago. A good part of our enjoyment of the trip was due to the quietness and peace we experienced there, the benefit of the park's relatively low visitation rates. In my opinion, elevating this monument to national park status would destroy its special qualities. Nicholas Briard's article, The Swiss Model, details how crowds, traffic jams, and pollution are impacting too many of our national parks. Why inflict that on a place like Chiricahua? Doesn't look like there's a picture of Chiricahua here, but it is a beautiful place. It's a hard debate, you know. Everyone has equal rights to be outside and to experience our world, but there are so many people that with everyone out there at the same time, you know, how do you really have that one-on-one connection? Looks like there are a few small ads here, more adventure ads. This one for sailing vacations that will leave you refreshed and relaxed. And down here we've got them encouraging you to go explore Fairbanks, Alaska. On this side we've got 5 of the most sought after US silver dollars in one set to help create your ultimate silver dollar set. Looks like it comes with a bonus case as well. A stunning photo. It says it's caribou along their traditional migration route near Anaktivuk Pass, a village inside gates of the Arctic National Park and Preserve. You can see all the caribou traversing a route unknown to us. This is a huge national park win for the largest national park landscape in the entire system, with 16 million acres of contiguous, wild, roadless parklands. I know to explore much of Arctic National Park, you need to fly in by bush plane. It's not really easily accessible to the public, and there's definitely something beautiful and storied and wild about that. It says, the decision to restore the grizzly bear is a testament to America's courage to give one of our wildest animals the freedom to rebound. That's from the President, Teresa Pinero, who wrote that first bit that we read. Allowing the Pinyon Plain mine to proceed is subjecting this landscape and its interconnected waters to a legacy of devastation and disregarding the rights of the indigenous peoples on this land. That is from Sanober Mirza, NPCA's Arizona Program Manager. I'm sure it's hard for the people living in this village within the park. We've been the stewards of the land for so long, to see short-sightedness coming in. People only want to take and not give back to the land. next page has an article titled Tour to Greg. It's about a film based on Greg Townsend's experience of working for a group called Rite of Passage for over 40 years. Follows his true story of a man who takes at-risk youth across the country on homemade bicycles. Looks like Greg Townsend here is a coach and a welding instructor, and he teaches his students to weld their own bicycle and then takes them on multi-hundred-mile tours to beautiful natural places and hopes to inspire them. Just read a couple blurbs from this. It says, when you're a producer looking for stories, you're really looking for characters, Sanders said. Greg is a special guy. How many people do you know that have pet tarantulas, farm chickens, have a helicopter welding lab, and have done ski patrol in Japan? Once Townsend knew that Sander was in it for the right reasons, he agreed to participate in the movie. It stars Matthew Modine, this man here, who you might know from his roles in Oppenheimer, Stranger Things, and Full Metal Jacket. And the movie follows Townsend leading his students on a 762-mile Tour de Grande, cycling a trip from Denver to the Grand Canyon. As the film depicts plenty of spot-on character traits, such as Townsend's constant stretching, his catchphrases, and his sarcastic humor. In the movie, as in life, Townsend doesn't swear or drink and has never had a cup of coffee. The producer incorporated as many of those details into the script as he could. Goes on to detail some of his adventures, them deciding which ones they wanted to use. Doing that scene where they're filming along the desolate edge of Death Valley National Park. We were really dying. We were really doing that. We were riding bikes through Death Valley. It was 110 degrees. We were wearing these bike suits. The sun was beaming. It was all method. The real Greg Townsend served as a consultant for the film. He loaned his own van to be filmed as the team's support vehicle and supplied all of the bicycles, which he welded with his daughter. Townsend motivated the cast on a physical level too. One day, the actors were riding in the van up the Sierra Nevada mountains to film when they passed Townsend on his own bike, climbing more than a vertical mile of hairpin turns to the set. The guy's a real-life superhero, Gilliori said. He doesn't have a costume on, but the guy has superpowers. He saves kids, he changes people's lives, he allows them to see something different. Townsend said, "My hope for the movie is that someone is inspired to get out of their own self-centered self and maybe give back a little to other people. Work with troubled kids, or volunteer with a Boys and Girls Club." Looks like for their wrap party, under the light of the full moon, the cast and crew waded into the chilly waters of the Colorado River, sharing food and drink, and enjoying their last moments together after nearly a month of filming. I felt like we were on one of Greg Townsend's bikepacking trips, he said. It was a lot more appropriate than having a wrap party at a bar or a restaurant. We had it under the stars, barefoot in the sand. Here are some scenes from the movie. One of them on their bike. One of what looks like a rather inspired student. And one of the actor playing Greg Townsend teaching the students to weld. On this page, we have an ad from Visit Cheyenne. Our outdoor spaces are this grand. Your road to Wyoming's national parks starts in Cheyenne. Find tranquility amidst towering forests and mesmerizing waterfalls. That does look quite beautiful. I can almost imagine this as Craig Townsend on another one of his adventures. On this page we have a little bit more sad of a story. It says Code Red. NPCA's latest report on our national park pollution paints a dire picture. There's something invigorating about simply standing in a national park and breathing deeply. The air just seems fresher, but unfortunately, parks aren't as clean or as insulated as many people may think. This March, the NPCA released its second Polluted Parks report, which analyzed raw data collected by the National Park Service from nearly 400 of the 429 park units to determine how many of these sites are imperiled by dirty air, as well as by 4 climate-related threats: wildfire, drought, sea level rise, and invasion by pests and pathogens. And the results speak for themselves. 96% of parks with pollution that causes concerning levels of harm to nature. 95 parks threatened by wildfire that could cause irreparable harm to ecosystems. 50 average miles of visibility lost due to haze. 48 parks, predominantly among the East and Gulf Coasts, that are seriously threatened by sea level rise. It is an unfortunate reality that the world around us is changing. We can each only do our part. And enjoy the parks while we have them. This is an ad for the Texas State Parks Parking Pass. You know, each state has their own systems, way of doing things. And I would encourage you this summer to look into your state's allowances. Because once you have a pass, it's a lot more encouraging to want to get out and explore. The building of trust. Before even opening a new welcome center, I'm gonna butcher this, at Katadin Woods and Waters National Monument is changing the relationship between the park and the region's Wabanaki nations. Looks like this is a new welcome center set to open in August. I love when places use unique architectural design in order for a building to almost blend in with its natural surroundings. Here we have something that you can cut out or rip out and mail in to get information on your next adventure. I don't think I will. I do donate to the National Parks Conservation Alliance, which is how I get these magazines. And I don't really well, I send me more, I'm just going to be overloaded with ideas. On the side, I've got a picture of the Colorado River. Looks like Horseshoe Bend. A new photography book from Pete McBride celebrating one of America's most valuable and iconic rivers and serving as a warning of overuse and climate change. This is a continuation of this article discussing plans for a new welcome center in Maine with more people that are visiting the parks. There's had to be talks on how to expand, how to allow admission to everyone without overloading the natural resources. So it's nice to see that there is change taking place. This little article talks about a culture in peril. Looks like we've got an artifact here. Some sort of bin with a carved face on the front. From its inception, the National Park Service has been tasked with preserving the nation's cultural treasures. It's a tall order. The agency manages nearly 200 million artifacts and documents, as well as 26,000 historic structures that tell the story of the nation, from the persistence of indigenous cultures to the creation of the atomic bomb to the pursuit of immigrant rights. While the Park Service's portfolio continues to grow with each park designation or expansion, the resources allotted to inventory, digitize, safeguard, and share this legacy have atrophied since 1995. Congress has repeatedly slashed the park's cultural resources budget, and the agency now reports a shortfall of some 450 cultural resources staff, including archaeologists and curators. It's not that the Park Service isn't doing their job. They just don't have the resources, the people, the trained professional staff to take care of all of these artifacts and museum collection pieces appropriately. There's not always, in my opinion, enough interest in history and preserving. It's just human way, I think, doomed to repeat the past. Though it is sad to think about beautiful cultural artifacts sitting on a dusty shelf somewhere. I'm sure archaeologists in the future will be excited to find these havens of history. Another underwater photo, light streaming in, talking about vanishing sea meadows. This appears to be Laguna Madre's seagrass beds. The sea level rise is portending major changes in the world's marine ecosystems. The Laguna Madre is a shallow body of water along Texas's southern coast, a natural wonder. It is one of just a handful of coastal lagoons in the world with water that has a higher salt concentration than that of seawater. The lagoon, which sits apart within Padre National Island Seashore, attracts a riot of seabirds, not to mention the many other creatures that thrive below its surface. wager that this is one of those creatures. A dwarf seahorse, using his tail to hold on to the reeds, stay steady in the currents. This junior park ranger badge, same as ones on the first page. We're seeing a lot of callbacks. And if you've never been to a national park, in the visitor center, there's usually a little section with stuff for junior rangers aimed at getting children involved and interested in the park system. Things like scavenger hunts and games and cute little vests for them to wear. This article is titled "A Badge of Wonder, a tale of 40 junior ranger badges, a lost hat, and an ageless pursuit." 10 years ago, I stood in the visitor center at Death Valley National Park, watching a ranger swear in a trio of boisterous 7-year-olds who had just completed the booklet to become junior rangers. The ceremony ended with the kids high-fiving each other while their bemused parents looked on. After the group left, I sidled my 50-something self over to the ranger and said, "I am so jealous. I would love to become a junior ranger." Looks like the ranger said, "Well, you know, there's no age limit." He assured the rider that he wasn't toying with them. This is Junior Ranger Joe at Lyndon B. Johnson National Historic Park. I think what they're saying is there's no age limit on wonder. There's no age limit on playing, on getting involved and learning new things. And we are all capable of being a junior again, learning new skills and taking on new things. Being a junior ranger, I found, is an exercise in cultivating mindfulness, presence, and wonder. And that's really what it's all about. We are at one of the featured articles from the front page, titled 4 Walks. We have 4 photos here, perhaps one from each walk. This one looks like springtime to me, flowers blooming. Perhaps this is summer, the greenery and the heat from the sun. This spiky little plant. Some trees weighed down, snowfall. When I decided to camp 4 nights over 4 seasons in Rocky Mountain National Park, I hoped for some time alone in the woods. I got that, plus a snowstorm almost too big to handle. Ice crystals on the inside walls of the tent shimmered in the light of my headlamp. I checked my phone, which I had kept in my sleeping bag so the battery wouldn't freeze. 5:30 a.m. I sat up and tapped the nylon, expecting a layer of light snow to glide down, but instead the fabric felt heavy to the touch. Uh-oh. I anxiously unzipped the door, and a mini avalanche tumbled into the tent. put on my snow boots and dug my way out. It was pitch black, and snowflakes pelted my face. From the outside, the tent looked like an igloo with an orange crest, and I wondered whether I'd be able to find the trail leading back to my car under 3 feet of snow. My breakfast skillet dehydrated meal would have to wait. I had to get out of there. Nature is sure capable of changing fast. This was not what I had in mind when I first set out to camp in the wild basin of Rocky Mountain National Park. My original inspiration was A Year in the Woods, 12 Small Journeys into Nature, a small book that I had received as a gift a couple years ago. In it, the author Eklund laments about how the incessant demands of daily life have kept him from experiencing the simple joys of nature, so he decides to leave his house after lunch once a month for a year and spend the night by a small pond in a forest near his Oslo home. His idea was that with no one around and nothing to do, he could pay attention to the subtle changes that mark the passage of the seasons. We most clearly perceive nature in these transitions, and yet they are also the easiest thing to miss, because they most often occur in the most minuscule of moments, he writes. To experience them requires stillness and attention, as well as an openness to one's surroundings. I could relate to Eklund's yearnings. I knew about the countless benefits of spending time in nature, but work deadlines, grocery shopping, and carpools to kids' activities have a way of taking precedence over walks outside. What I lacked was intentionality. The idea of setting aside a few dates to be out in nature was appealing. I was not even done reading Eklund's book when I decided to emulate him. I'd camp 4 nights, one in each season, in the same spot of Rocky Mountain. Eklund had boldly started his year in the woods in January, but I figured I'd ease into it. I'd begin with spring and work my way towards winter. I wonder if this is a photo of the spring. I'm sure many of us can relate to the difficulty of finding time to be outside, or even to be indoors with yourself. The season doesn't seem too difficult of a commitment. While Rocky Mountain is not exactly in my backyard, some of its trailheads are less than an hour away from my home in Boulder, Colorado. Wild Basin was an obvious choice for my micro-expeditions, as Eklund calls them. It sees relatively few visitors, and that park entrance is the closest to me, which was important because, like Eklund, I'd arranged to leave home each time after a shortish work day and be back at my desk the next morning. I wasn't sure these interludes of solitude would be long enough to recharge, but I intended to make the most of them. I had never been to Wild Basin before, but I settled on the Campers Creek campsite. It's about 2.3 miles from the trailhead, so I could get there and back reasonably quickly. From what I could tell, the campsite was not by a lake and didn't offer any sweeping views, which I'd hoped meant less competition to book the site. Nevertheless, I was ready when the reservation period opened in March, and in a matter of minutes I had booked the site for spring, summer, and fall. That's bold, to book all 3 at once. But once the commitment is made, it'd be a lot harder to back out of it. So maybe it was a good idea. Let's see how long is this article. Should we keep reading? Kind of like to hear how his experience went. He starts in spring. What is spring? Astronomically speaking, begins on the equinox around March 20th, when day and night are each about 12 hours long. I associate spring with pretty little flowers, but you would be hard-pressed to find a blossom anywhere in Rocky Mountain in late March. The park's wilderness camping page provides a useful factoid for each of its campsites. What it calls the 20-year average snow-free date. For Campers Creek, that date was June 5th, so I had picked June 6th and hoped for the best. On the day, I belatedly realized that to get my permit, I had to go to the park's wilderness office, which closed at 3:30 p.m. and required a significant detour. As I drove, the skies went from a welcoming azure to an ominous slate hue. The ranger at the wilderness office told me a thunderstorm was expected that night, and he gave me another tidbit to chew on. A black bear had just been spotted near my destination. "They're definitely out and about right now," he said, as a screen behind him displayed images of bears getting into all kinds of mischief. "They're waking up from the winter time. They're definitely hungry." Paying attention to the little things usually requires discipline on my part, but it was easy when I first started hiking. The ground was littered with brown, brittle pine needles, yet new life shot through in the form of yellow, blue, and purple flowers that my phone's plant identification app later informed me were Thermopsis, Clematis, and Mertensia. Bell-shaped white blossoms on berry bushes and moth cocoons held the promise of even more changes to come. With every step, soft patch of moss and interesting lichen pattern, my mood brightened, and I stopped to snap pictures. My worries about a rain-soaked outing dissipated as the sun emerged and rain filtered through the ponderosas. The straps of my overloaded backpack started to dig into my shoulders over time, though, and thoughts of unfinished tasks started creeping back in. So it was with some relief that, a little less than 2 hours after leaving my car, I spotted the sign for the turnout to Campers Creek. I followed a muddy path to the clearing amid towering spruce, which would be my home for the night and others in the months ahead. I dropped my heavy pack, set up camp away from the rain puddles, and placed my bear-proof canister a safe distance away. Since there was quite a bit of daylight left, I decided to walk another couple miles up to Sand Beach Lake, a destination the ranger had recommended. Hiking up was like going back in time. By the trailhead, aspens sported bright green leaves, but higher, leaves were smaller. Then there were no leaves at all, and finally there were no more aspens. The broad-tailed hummingbirds I had seen earlier were gone, and I encountered patches of crusty snow which eventually covered the trail. Because the whole hike had been a walk through the woods, it was somewhat of a shock to arrive at the lake, where I was afforded a 360-degree view. The still water was ringed with conifers and a few stands of willows, and all around me, gently sloping peaks dotted the horizon. I couldn't believe I had the whole place to myself. I sat down on a granite boulder jutting out into the water, ate a salami sandwich, and lingered as daylight started to fade. It was past 9 by the time I was back in my tent. I attempted to read my book for a few minutes and conked out. Turns out that my early June nights at nearly 10,000 feet can be quite frigid. Despite wearing all my layers, I struggled to get warm. I got up before dawn and couldn't eat my breakfast because my canister, I discovered, is not only bear-proof, but also resisted my cold and numb fingers. By the time I was done packing, the day's first beams of sunlight had turned the tips of the spruce trees a greenish gold. I was about to hike out when I noticed, a few feet away, what I can best describe as a miniature throne, delicately fashioned out of moss, pieces of wood, and pine cones. Either my ability to pay attention to small things was worse than I thought, or I'd have to reconsider my take on the existence of forest fairies. I was back at the trailhead before 7:30 a.m., and it was there that I saw the first humans since I'd left the car the day before. Do you believe in forest fairies? I don't see why they couldn't be real. There's always some magical things happening if you're willing to pay attention. It's like in the summer trip. Trip 2 in mid-August had the comforting feel of a personal tradition. I now knew when and where to pick up my permit and how long the hike would take. I was greeted by the same friendly ranger at the wilderness office who gave me the same warning about a big, burly black bear. Some changes were imminently apparent. It was considerably balmier, and the warm air carried the scent of pine needles. Also, the parking lot and the trail were more crowded. Wildflowers were less abundant, but tended to be larger, and bees swarmed around purple asters and thistles. Gone was the chirp of hummingbirds, but the buzz of grasshoppers provided the new soundtrack to much of my hike. The narrow path to the campsite was now lined with ferns, and the fairy throne was in ruins. After setting up camp in a swirl of mosquitoes, I decided to go back to the lake, both to take in the view and to escape the bloodthirsty bugs. The scene at the lake was no longer a surprise, but it was breathtaking nonetheless. The snow had melted away, and little white clumps of western pearly everlasting flowers had bloomed by the shore. I encountered one solo camper and a couple, but we kept our distance. Above me, contrails streaked the sky, and I wondered if true wilderness still existed anywhere. I quickly ate a snack at the same rock I'd sat on the last time and headed back to my tent. I woke up at an ungodly hour because I was on a mission. When I had booked my summer outing months earlier, I hadn't realized it would coincide with my daughter's first day of school, but if I packed up quickly and kept a steady pace on the trail, I'd be home in time to walk them to class. I felt pretty good about myself when I got in the car before 7 and was downright buoyant after spotting 4 bighorn sheep on the drive. But all that cheeriness disappeared when I passed the school and saw all the parents walking away. I had somehow missed the notice that school was to start an hour early that day, and all my planning had been for naught. So it must be the lake that he stopped and ate on, with some beautiful reflections of the clouds. Got photos of some pine cones, some beautiful leaves, some type of a tangle, branches or wires perhaps. Maybe we'll find out. Fall. I never expected my camping trips to be affected by the shenanigans in Congress, but as the October 3rd date of my fall outing approached, the likelihood of a government shutdown on October 1st seemed to increase by the day. If the federal government closed, national parks would likely shutter too, and if they did, who knew how long it would last? Not willing to risk it, I called the wilderness office on September 26th to see if Campers Creek was available that night. It was, so I hurriedly packed my bag and headed to the park. In early fall, Rocky Mountain is the stage for 2 star performances, elk bugling and aspen leaves turning golden. I knew I'd be more than likely to see elk in nearby Estes Park than on my hike to Campers Creek, and I did in fact see them all over town, but I was hoping to catch the aspen spectacle. It didn't take long for my hopes to be dashed. In each aspen cluster I saw on the trail, the trees had already lost their leaves, or the holdouts were mottled with black and gray spots. Someone on a passing trail said abundant rains in the spring were the culprit, while his crewmate blamed the abrupt weather changes. It's only a guess, though, he said. Because aspens are pretty much the only deciduous trees along the trail to Campers Creek, I had to search for fall colors among shrubs, vines, and small plants. It was a diminutive yet stunning show of scarlet, canary, and tangerine shades, sometimes all in one leaf. The air was chillier, and more than once I caught a whiff of mushrooms. One change that was inescapable was a shorter day, so I hurried to my campsite to pitch my tent. Back on the trail to the lake, I heard a ruffling noise and turned to face a male deer sporting a rack the size of a small chandelier. He gave me a quick glance before darting into the brush. It was dusk by the time I made it to the lake. I was threading my way towards my usual rock through dense strands of head-high willows when I stopped in my tracks. About 25 yards in front of me was an antlerless moose the size of a horse. It appeared almost black in the fading light, except for its gray legs and tuft of white on its rump. I'd learned later that moose are not native to Colorado, but this one looked right at home, unwilling to cede an inch of its territory. We looked at each other for a long while, and then it lost interest and started munching on grasses. I stayed a few more minutes, then bade it farewell and retreated. After encountering 2 large mammals, I found myself thinking about mountain lions the whole way back to the tent. At first, I imagined how cool it would be to spot one of America's most elusive predators. But as darkness fell and the battery of my headlamp weakened, I started to envision what would happen if one of those gorgeous cats decided to prey on me. I picked up a good-sized rock and a stick, just in case. There is something soothing about packing up your tent. It involves steps that have to be performed in a certain order, and it's not a task you can leave for later, like filing expenses. I was also starting to enjoy the routine of the morning hike back to the car. It was downhill, for one thing, and completing an hour-long hike in a national park before many people have had their first cup of coffee made me feel like the day stretched out ahead of me was full of possibilities. Winter. There is no such thing as spring, summer, or fall camping, though winter camping is a thing. In fact, in anticipation of my trip, I picked up not one but 2 winter camping guides at the library. In these books, I read about interesting skills such as how to make a dead man, which is a sort of anchor for your tent when you camp on snow, and unsettling winter hazards from snow blindness and chilblains to sun bumps and Raynaud syndrome. I also figured out that I needed to up my gear game. I had shivered each night so far, so my 22-year-old sleeping bag was not going to cut it, and my so-called 3-season tent wouldn't do either. Winter is the one season where your gear really makes a difference between comfort and misery, or even survival, wrote Molly Absolin in Winter Camping Skills. I wanted comfort, and I certainly wanted survival. My wife had given me a 0-degree sleeping bag for Christmas, and I settled on a mountaineering tent called the Hot Box. I really hoped it would live up to its name. One of my library books recommended that winter camping newbies pick a day after a snowstorm for their first outing. Based on forecasts, March 13th seemed promising, but as the date neared, it looked increasingly likely that I'd be camping in a snowstorm. When I showed up at the wilderness office, though, gray skies were distilling just a few meager snowflakes, and I reasoned that if conditions worsened significantly, I could always scrap my camping plans. I told the ranger who handed me my permit as much, and it seemed to reassure her, somewhat. We're totally okay with you going out there during a blizzard because this is your park and you have the ability to go wherever you want, she said. But that doesn't mean we aren't going to worry about you. She told me that no one else had requested a camping permit and that the park would probably shut down the next day. Just know that it will be you out there, and that's it, she said. There was almost no snow on the ground by the time I started hiking a little after 2 p.m. I saw some hikers in jeans and tennis shoes. This was hardly the setting for impending doom, I thought, but as I went up, I encountered both more residual snow from the earlier snowfall and more fresh accumulation. Before long, a layer of white covered everything. The park asked backcountry campers to avoid designated tent sites if there is more than 4 inches of snow on the ground. So I picked a flattish spot in the vicinity of Campers Creek. Fallen trunks lay in a nearby jumble, and a dead spruce tree stood uncomfortably close, though after side-eyeing it, I decided it wasn't a potential widowmaker. I strapped on my snowshoes, packed the snow to create a pad, and pitched my tent. It was still early, and I wondered what the lake looked like in winter, and if I could make it there. I decided to give it a try. The fresh snow turned every tree stump and rock into smooth white humps. I spotted my first ever snowshoe hare before it hopped away. The only other creature I saw was a brave little spider traipsing on top of the snow cover. I relished the quiet that had descended on the wild basin, and the snow that felt like an ally rather than a menace. Daylight was fading when I made it to a frozen, snow-covered sand beach lake. I could barely make out the far shore of the lake, and anything beyond disappeared into the whiteness. I wish there was a photo of that. There's a fine line between solitude and loneliness. As full darkness set in, I started gravitating towards the latter before the increasingly snowy path demanded my full attention. Back in my tent, I slipped into my warm sleeping bag and wondered about what the next day would bring. When I surveyed the snowy scene the next morning, I briefly considered leaving my igloo tent behind and coming back later to get it. After thinking better of it, I used a snowshoe as a shovel to dig out the tent, which took me most of an hour. There is such a thing as too much snow for snowshoes, or at least for my snowshoes. I found myself knee-deep in the powder, and each step involved lifting not only my foot, but a big pile of snow on top of it. I had to catch my breath every minute or so. Also, the trail was nowhere to be seen. I kept straying from the path I thought I knew and tripping over snow-covered tree trunks and rocks. After 3.5 hours, I finally made it to the parking lot, now a vast white plain from which protruded a boulder-sized mound where my car had been. I got to work shoveling my car out, but after 2 hours I had moved it only 10 yards, and the country road was still an additional 100 yards away. I needed to let my wife know I wouldn't make it home that day, but one of Wild Basin's wildest attributes is that there is virtually no cell service, so I walked towards a few houses nearby, hoping someone would let me use their phone. Most were clearly vacant. I found one with a couple of snow-covered cars outside and knocked on the door, but no one answered. Finally, I spotted a house with snow-free cars and light inside. The owners, a couple, were understandably wary at first, but they let me use their landline and then generously offered me their guest bedroom for the night. The husband told me that he hadn't experienced as big a snowstorm in a couple of years, which both validated my experience and put my judgment into question. The park had closed, and there was no information as to when the trailhead parking lot would be plowed, so I figured I might as well continue to work at clearing a path for my car even though snow was still falling. I borrowed a snow shovel and dug for 4 hours before calling it a night. After sharing a glass of wine with my host, I showered and, exhausted, crawled into bed. It was my best night's sleep in recent memory. The snowfall had finally stopped by the time I walked back to my car at 7 the next morning. I toiled for a few more hours, then caught a break when I convinced the operator of a county snowplow to clear a section of the park road even though it was outside his jurisdiction. My car was still struggling to get a grip on the soft snow, but around 11 a park ranger showed up. He offered to give my car a push, and just like that, the car lurched forward and I was on my way home. It almost didn't feel real to be effortlessly zooming at 55 miles per hour on clear roads. What did these 4 nights in the wilderness get me? They did allow me to escape the ever-present worries of daily life, but I was never out there long enough to achieve a state of reverie a la Thoreau. My Walden Pond was a destination rather than an inspiration, and I found myself spending much of my time on the move, hiking in and out, setting up camp, and taking it down. I did find instances of ordinary and extraordinary beauty, though, in the snowy pom-poms on pine branches or the soothing chomp of a moose at ease with my presence. I also found solitude, that elusive quality in increasingly crowded national parks. After I returned from my winter trip, I was somewhat miffed not to be peppered with questions from my family. I had just camped alone in the year's biggest snowstorm, trudged through snow up to my waist, and gone on a 2-day shoveling marathon. How could they not want to know everything? But then I came to see that this was precisely the reason I had ventured out by myself. Yes, I could attempt to share my stories, But in the end, the experiences and memories will be mine and mine alone. Here's a picture of his struggling snowshoes, compared to some photos I've seen of Native American snowshoes that live in areas like that are 2 to 3 times the size. I can see why it was a struggle. I like what he says about the experiences being mine and mine alone, because it's so true. On this page, we've got Big Pine Key in Florida's Lower Keys advertisement, home to wildlife refuge. 2 deer. Didn't know that there were deer in Florida. Here we have an artistic rendition of climbing, hiking, planting trees perhaps, caring for birds. Do or die. As climate change threatens some of the national park's most treasured species, scientists ponder a drastic strategy, moving plants and animals into new habitats to save them. Opens up to the question, are humans stewards of the rest of the animals in the world? Is that why we have consciousness? Or do we just exist with them? Here's a photo of some trees in a jar, perhaps in an unfamiliar landscape, being moved somewhere. And it says, to do it right is going to be very, very difficult. One phrase that's jumping out at me is playing God, which would be an incredibly difficult thing to do. It's an image of a man carrying a bull trout on his back. As others struggle to survive in the current. Bull trout is the canary in the coal mine. I'm not going to read through this article because this video is getting quite long as it is. But I am curious to read about the Grand Canyon. But it goes through talks of multiple different national parks, multiple different projects, all seem to be at work together. This is curious. Just a blank sheet. Some more information on Colliers, the complete national park corner site. Here we are. Leading the Grand Canyon. A search for an invasive plant, ghosts of the past, and belonging on a journey down river. And a gorgeous picture of the Colorado River winding through. Looks like the end of the Grand Canyon as the sun sets. I love these kind of long exposure shots. I really capture the motion of water, the areas where it sprays the most. Here's a photo of one of the rafts used to traverse the river, loaded with equipment and food. Let's see how long is this article. looks to be a drawn rendition of the route that they took from Lee's Ferry on mile 0, past some rapids, round a bend, there's Grand Canyon Village up at the top, Phantom Ranch, through another few rapids, down the Colorado River, 226 miles to Diamond Creek. This photo says, in 1938, Elzada Clover on the right and Lois Trotter on the left became the first botanists and non-native women to successfully run the Grand Canyon. Savigny's research into the two women inspired her own journey downriver. On the left, it details how the author's rafting trip took 15 days and required navigating dozens of major rapids. It would be an incredibly interesting trip to take. With an experienced guide, so you can learn about the plants and habitats of the Grand Canyon. Here's a picture of a storm over the canyon. We can see a bolt of lightning in the background, and rain pelting down out of the clouds. I love seeing these kinds of storms off in the distance, where you can follow the rain as it moves along. Maybe I'll make a separate video just reading this article. This photo, after the last one of the storm, almost looks like hope. Clouds dissipating, sun shining onto calm, still water. Early morning in Granite Gorge. I'm so lonely for it now, I can hardly stand it, Clover wrote in her diary after leaving the river. It would be difficult to have such an intimate experience with a raw, natural wonder and then just leave it behind and continue on with your life. On this page we have an ad for historic travel destinations, river cruise vacations. Probably not a river like this, but you can experience the beauty and history of many of Canada's rivers. Wide, calm rivers with beautiful little villages and lighthouses along the side. More about historic travel destinations. Aviation Museum. Historical Road in Springfield. And an interesting rendition of Abraham Lincoln. Along the famous Route 66 in Springfield, Illinois. Here's another one of our featured articles from the front. The dog trainers of Cat Island. It's a photo of Raymond Nosaka seated behind the dog, one of 25 Japanese American soldiers selected for a racist experiment conducted by the U.S. Army on Mississippi Island during World War II. Looks like the U.S. Army made an attempt to train dogs to hunt Japanese Japanese soldiers. The secret experiment on an island off the Gulf Coast did not go well. Let's see if we can find out why it didn't go well. After a couple of months, the army was eager to inspect the progress. In January of 1943, a demonstration was organized that underwhelmed the officers in attendance. One colonel described the performance as somewhat of a vaudeville animal act. Prestre had completely failed in his effort. Although dogs continued to be trained on Cat Island as messengers, scouts, and casualty dogs, the attack dog program was scuttled. The soldiers of the 100th Battalion went on to prove their valor in combat in Europe. The unit sustained so many casualties that it became known as the Purple Heart Battalion. They really were the vanguard, said Isami Yoshihara, the lead docent of the 100th Infantry Battalion Veterans Group. They failed in their mission to prove they were good soldiers and prove they could be trusted. I don't want to guess where we'd be today as people of Japanese descent in the United States. This details a time when Masako was wounded in combat. He managed to crawl into a cave to escape the firefight. As he hid, a dog appeared in the cave's entrance. He says, "I was so happy. I called to the dog. The dog came in and kept me warm. And I thought of how I used to treat the dogs, and here he just kept me warm. After that, he disappeared. I don't know where he went." His daughter said that her father never forgot Cat Island. When he died in 2014, at the age of 98, he had the scar of a dog bite on his forearm. Every time he would talk about it, he would still cry. That's how it was. They had to prove their loyalty. And if there's any example of how pure and caring nature is, it would be dogs. Something that has become so accessible to us as people. We really have an instinct to care for and protect them. And even for the people whose mission it was to teach dogs to hunt other humans, they couldn't stop crying about it decades later. If we could extend that care that we have for our companion animals to all creatures, it would be a lot easier to change the way that we think about the world, change the course that the world is on. I believe this is the last page. Photo finish. Beautiful full-page size photo of Yosemite National Park. You can see the iconic half dome in the distance, and Glacier Point's Trailside Museum, an old building, and a little tiny person sitting on the wall, marveling at the beauty of nature. Of course, can't finish a magazine without one more ad. The Yellowstone National Park's own $2 bill with bears, bison, and Thomas Jefferson. I'm not sure why Thomas Jefferson's is on, but it's 78% off. So. Another spot where you can leave a donation and build a legacy to protect national parks for future generations, which really is kind of the purpose of it all. Thank you for being here with me today. If you're still here, still awake, I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your evening. I hope that you feel safe. And I hope that you manage to find the time and the peace to go explore and enjoy the nature around you this summer.